watched a kid and just thought, what is going on in their head? Well, you're not alone. Today, we're diving deep into the brilliant work of Jean Piaget to finally understand why kids think so differently. And spoiler alert, it's not because they're just small adults. They're playing by a whole different set of mental rules. Okay, let's start with a classic puzzle. You see these two glasses, right? To us, it's totally obviously have the same amount of water. But a young kid, they will insist, that the tall, skinny glass has more. And this isn't just a silly mistake. It's actually a huge clue that tells us a ton about how their brain is wired. This very problem was at the heart of what we're exploring today. So what is all this? Well, it's part of a field called developmental psychology. And that's really just the science of how we grow and change over our entire lives, physically, socially, and of course, cognitively. You could say it's the story of how we all become who we are. And a giant in this field was the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. He was obsessed with this one big question. See, when he was giving intelligence tests to kids, he noticed something fascinating. The kids weren't just getting answers wrong randomly. The younger ones were all making the same kinds of mistakes. And that's when it hit him. These aren't just mistakes. They're windows into how a child's mind is actually structured. So how did Piaget explain this? His big idea was that in order to make any sense of the world, our brains need to build these little mental blueprints for everything we come across. He called these blueprints schemas. Honestly, the best way to think about them is like mental file folders. You've got a schema for dog, another for car, and even for really abstract stuff like friendship or justice. They are the absolute building blocks of how we understand anything. Okay, so you have these mental folders, but what happens when you run into something new? Piaget said we do two things. First, we try to cram the new experience into a folder we already have. That's called assimilation. So a toddler who has a horsey schema sees a deer and shouts horsey. But then, when that doesn't quite work, we have to adjust. We either change the folder or in this case, make a whole new one for deer. And that is accommodation. This constant back and forth is basically learning in a nutshell. Now here's where it gets really cool. Piaget argued that this whole process of building and changing our schemas doesn't just happen randomly. He believed it unfolds in 4 distinct, predictable stages. And here it is. This is the roadmap for that journey. From the day we're born all the way through adulthood, our thinking totally transforms through these 4 stages. Each one has its own major milestone. Let's break them down. It all starts right at birth in the sensory motor stage. Here, babies are like little scientists, learning about the world purely through their senses and actions, touching, grabbing, putting everything in their mouth. The massive breakthrough here is something called object permanence. Before this develops, out of sight literally means out of mind. If you hide a toy under a blanket for the baby, it hasn't just been hidden, it has ceased to exist. Poof, gone from the universe. Wild, right? Next up is the pre-operational stage, and the big word here is egocentrism. Now, this isn't just about being selfish. It's a literal inability to see the world from anyone else's perspective. It's why a little kid might think a perfect birthday gift for their grandpa is a new Barbie doll, because that's what they would want. And this is exactly why they fail the water glass test. It's because of centration. Their brains can only focus on one thing at a time, the height of the water, and they just can't consider the width of the glass at the same time. But then, things really start to click. In the concrete operational stage, logical thought finally comes online, but, and this is key, it's tied to the real, physical, concrete world, stuff they can actually see and touch. Now, they can totally understand that pouring water into a different shaped glass doesn't change how much water there is. The water glass problem, officially solved. And finally, around age 12, we enter the formal operational stage. Now our thinking isn't tied to the physical world anymore. We can start to grapple with abstract ideas like freedom or justice. We can think hypothetically, all those what-if scenarios, and use real deductive reasoning to solve complex problems. But of course, science is never done. Piaget built an incredible foundation for us, but his theory definitely wasn't the final word on how our minds develop. Modern psychologists have figured out that development is actually a lot more messy and fluid than Piaget's neat stages suggest. In fact, many abilities, like that object permanence thing, show up way earlier than he thought. Today, we see development less like climbing a staircase and more like walking up a continuous ramp. A really different take came from Piaget's contemporary, Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky looked at Piaget's work and said, hold on, you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle here. While Piaget was focused on how kids learn by interacting with the physical world, Vygotsky pointed out the absolutely critical role of our social world. Our parents, our teachers, our friends, and our culture. Vygotsky gave us this amazing idea called scaffolding. Just think about scaffolding on a building. It's a temporary support that helps workers get to higher levels. In the same way, adults provide support that lets children reach higher levels of thinking than they could ever get to on their own. It's the idea that learning is a team sport. So, with all these updates and critiques, you might be wondering, okay, what's the big deal about Piaget then? Why are we still talking about him today? What's his lasting legacy? And here it is. This is the absolute core of it all. Piaget's most powerful, game-changing contribution was this simple but profound idea. Children are not just miniature adults with less knowledge. Their minds operate in a completely different way. They think qualitatively differently. And let me tell you, that one insight totally revolutionized how we approach education and parenting. Which leaves us with one final thought to take with you. Understanding that a child's reality is just fundamentally different from ours, well, that's not just some trivia. It has the power to change how we interact with them, giving us more patience, more empathy, and making us better teachers. So how will it change the way you talk to a child?